everyone, welcome back. My name is Lynn Wilson. I'm so glad you're joining me on Hope for Today. This is the second one of the season. Can you believe it? We're back in gear. If you missed last week, you got to go back. I'm just telling you, you got to go back and listen. We talked about disappointments and opportunities. I also gave a little bit more of an introduction, if you're new here, as to what Hope for Today is, and that's a podcast that will encourage you, to give you a little something that you can hang on to for the week, a little something that you can just kind of chew on all week. A plain and simple thought for the week that comes right from God's Word. And we talked about how to take our disappointments and turn them into opportunities. You know, we all have disappointments, but we all also have opportunities. God gives us a lot of opportunities. I was reading a devotion the other day, and it was so funny. Oh, doesn't the Lord have a sense of humor? Do you ever find that? Oh my goodness, I find that. So I read a devotion. You ever hear of Dorcas in the Bible? Well, I knew of her, but never really, I guess I just never really took the time to thoroughly know who she was or what she was all about. And my devotion was on her. As you can see, as we get through our devotion today, it'll make more sense. But how the Lord uses things, oh, did he ever that day. I had to be a Dorcas. And let me tell you, it was a rough day. And I had lots of disappointments that day. And yet the Lord was giving me opportunities to serve him. And you ever go, I don't feel like serving him today. I don't feel like praying. I don't want to read my Bible. I don't want to listen to a sermon. Have you ever had a day like that? I hope you did. I hope I'm not alone in this. You know, when you know all the right things you're supposed to do, but you also know how you're feeling, discouraged, disappointed, overwhelmed, whatever, and you just don't want God giving you an opportunity to be happy and to serve him with joy, which is what we should be doing, but you're grumbling under your breath. So I have a question for you. What will you be remembered for? You know, there's many people that walk in my office, and, you know, as the saying goes, you're happy to see them leave, and other people I'm so sad to see leave. There are some people that I can talk to for hours, and I love it. They're so encouraging. They're full of joy. They always have a kind word for me. They make me feel like I'm special. And then there's other people maybe don't have the kind word to share. They bring discouragement instead of encouragement. You know, they just are not complimentary. They might tell you that, you know, your hair looks funny that day and you're thinking, I really liked my new haircut. And you know what I mean. And it just is a struggle. And the other day I had a rough day, a disappointing day, but the Lord kept giving me opportunities, you know. And I read this Bible story, and I was like, okay, so we're going to be in Acts chapter 9, verse 39. Peter went with them, and when he arrived, he was taken upstairs to the room. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. And the basic story of Dorcas is that she had a heart for poor people and for the widows. And back in Bible times, widows, if they lost their husband, it was, you know, everything was based on what the man did. And if you lost your husband, you virtually had nothing. And you were a poor person begging for food or trying to find scraps somewhere. And, you know, if it comes down to it, do you buy food or do you buy clothing? Well, you would buy food to feed your family, so clothing was a rare commodity. And Dorcas had a heart for these women, so she would make them clothing for the poor people and for the widows. And these women the widows were crying out to Peter, you know, could you basically resurrect her? You know, she was so kind. She did these wonderful things for us. Can you imagine yourself, and maybe you've been there, I know I have, I know I've been there where we've had no food or we've had no car because we didn't have any money to fix the car, or we've just been in a situation where we needed something in a desperate way. Not something like, oh, someday I'd like to have, but I mean in a desperate way, which is what these women were, and these poor people, they were desperate. They needed clothing. They needed to cover themselves. And money was not there readily available. And again, they're probably whatever money they had to buy food. And Dorcas reached out and sewed them clothing. What a kind act of somebody. She saw a need, a practical need. She didn't give them, fancy schmancy, whatever. She just did something practical. I talked last week on how I want my podcast to be something that's simple, that everybody can understand. And I also want it to be practical. I'm a very practical person. My home is a very functional, practical. It's not a Pinterest home. As much as I would like it to look like a Pinterest, no, I wouldn't. I say that. You look at a Pinterest board and you're like, oh, this looks great. That's not who I am. My home is a very functional home. If you come in my kitchen, you're going to find all my appliances. I'm going to drive some of you crazy who like, minimalistic look and neat and tidy. My appliances are on the counter because when I come home from work, I want that available for me to cook for my family. I need it functioning for where I am. It's the season I am in life. I don't have a lot of time when I come home from work, and I don't want to be digging and looking for things. But she looked at something practical. I come home from work and my home is functional so that I can be practical to serve my family with a good hot meal. She looked for a need that these people had, and she served them in a practical way. She sewed them clothes. Everybody needs clothing. Everybody needs food. And everybody needs to feel loved and feel special and feel encouraged. Dorcas would sew them clothing. She had to buy the fabric. She had to sew the fabric together. She had to give that to these individuals. What was she known for? When she died, the women were upset because they lost a friend who was generous, someone that had a servant's heart, and somebody that made an impact on the community. The women were remembering her kindness. They remembered her for that particular thing, for her kindness. When you leave this earth, what will you be remembered for? Will you be the person we remember and say, oh, they always had a smug look on their face, or they always had a choice word to share. They never had a complimentary thing to say. They were never encouraging. Oh, I couldn't stand that person because they did A, B, C. Or are you going to be remembered because you were kind, you were loving, you were caring, you were serving, you always had a verse of scripture to share? There's a man, he's been in glory for probably over 25 years is my guess, maybe even longer, Mr. Young. And I was in my early 20s, and I would hide from him when I went to church. It's like, oh no, here he comes again. And he always had a briefcase, and he'd open his, come. And he'd open his briefcase, and he might not remember your name, but he'd open it, and he'd pull out a tract, and he'd hand it to you, or he'd have a little booklet. And it was annoying. When you're 20, 22, 23, 24, and to have somebody chase you around church to always give you something. You're young, you want to live your own life, you want to do your own thing. Well, with age comes wisdom, and there are many things that Mr. Young gave me that I still keep in my Bible to this day. And there's a poem that I've shared with you, and it's called One Talent. I have to dig that poem out, and I'll read that to you again. But that poem I have used over and over and over when I have shared with different devotions, ladies groups, when I've spoken before at seminars, and it is just amazing what this one poem did for me. It totally transformed my life. It was from Mr. Young. Mr. Young gave me some other tracts and things that I still to this day cherish, and they're in my Bible. Mr. Young will be remembered for always handing out a word of encouragement. There's a gentleman who lives here in town, right near where we work, and I could go to the Walgreens parking lot. I could go to CVS parking lot. I could go to Stop and Shop, any store in this area. And this older man, he's been older since I can remember, and I've seen him for 30 years that I've been in this area. He goes on every windshield in that parking lot, and he puts a track on every windshield. He goes to the next shopping center, and he puts a track on every windshield. And then one day he handed it to me. This is a number of years ago, and I asked him, why do you do this? And he said, because I can't talk to the whole world, but I can pass a track out and get the gospel out that way. And he says, until the Lord does not allow me to walk anymore and he takes my last breath, I'm going to do this every day. He's out about 8 hours a day putting tracks out on cars. What will he be remembered for? You know, somebody might have gotten saved and have no idea, who put this on my car? Oh, just think that when he goes to glory, he'll meet the man that put the gospel on his car window and share the gospel, maybe not verbally, but in a way that he could. What will you be remembered for? What will you be remembered for? Your kindness and your generosity and your servant's heart like Dorcas? Or will you be remembered for something that, you know what, you're going to be sorry someday that you didn't make that change in your life, that you could have changed and made a difference and impacted another person, and you could have been kind to them, and you could have shared with them, and you could have shared the Lord with them. I want you to think about that this week as you go through the disappointments in life, and God gives you opportunities in life like we talked about last week. Be a Dorcas this week. Forget the disappointments. Look for the opportunities. How can you share kindness, generosity, or a servant's heart to someone else? Make a difference, make an impact in your local family, church, and community, that you can make a difference in a life, and that's what you want to be remembered for. All right, everyone, we'll catch you next week on the next podcast of Hope for Today.